Hey everyone, this is Kit Cabello with Hardlens Media. Welcome to another show. I'm joined here today with Paul DuPont, Daniel Upker. We've got a lot to talk about. We've got an action-packed episode of Hardlens Media, a lot of breaking stories. But first, guys, let's talk about good old Pete Buttigieg. Because you know what? I'm just not done talking about Pete Buttigieg and how he's a corporate sellout. So recently, the New York Times let out an article where it shows that McKinsey gives Pete Buttigieg permission to disclose about clients. Also, The Hill recently reported as well that since all this information is being released about McKinsey and Pete Buttigieg's clear connections with McKinsey, he's falling behind in fourth place. So it seems that Pete Buttigieg had to wait for permission from a lobby group to reveal his connections with McKinsey and his past relations with them. It goes back to what we talked about. Pete Buttigieg listens to his corporate donors and his lobby group supporters who give him money. So when they give him money, he does what they say. He had to wait for McKinsey to give him, for them to give their blessing to talk about his relationship and his past dealings with them. It says a lot about him as a candidate. It says a lot about him if he'll ever really step up to Wall Street or the top 1%, which obviously he won't. But I do have a comment from somebody very interesting who actually put Pete Buttigieg in his place. Here's a comment from Tulsi Gabbard on The Hill.
Graduated from a great school. He's a Rhodes Scholar. He's got this incredible resume, right? He could have chosen to work anywhere. Why he chose to go and work for a company like McKinsey that makes a hell of a lot of money off of putting people out of their jobs and has made a hell of a lot of money off of their consulting work in Afghanistan.
So, once again, it should show all of you why Tulsi Gabbard is on point and why she definitely should be at the debate. I wish that she would have probably reconsider it. But obviously, right off the bat, the more we learn about Pete Buttigieg, the more everyone must call into question who is he really and what is he really fighting for and standing for? Because obviously, if he has to wait for McKinsey for them to give him permission to talk about them, he's not a strong candidate at all. So now we're going to move on to our next story. So, guys, it's about Bernie Sanders.
I like Bernie Sanders.
You like Bernie Sanders?
I'm a big fan.
Who here likes Bernie Sanders?
A few people, give or take, just in a lot of the country.
Oh, really? Like,
You know who? What Bernie does to people that don't like him?
who? What does he do?
Gives them side eye.
Oh, there we go. Well, I got a very interesting article from the New York Times. So listen to this title and tell me what you guys think. Amid Bernie Sanders' resurgence, a progressive coalition endorses him. So it sounds weird, like just the way they even wrote it, because The Hill actually had a more simplified version of it. 50 progressive groups endorse Senator Bernie Sanders. But the New York Times has it, amid Bernie Sanders' resurgence, a progressive coalition endorses him. It almost seems...
like they're trying to make it sound contradictory in some way.
Yes. So the Center for Popular Democracy Action, a coalition of more than 40, well, The Hill said there was 50, community groups totaling about 600,000 members, will on Tuesday endorse Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont for the Democratic presidential nomination, signaling that Mr. Sanders' political standing among the party's left wing has rebounded or even risen months since he suffered a heart attack. So the New York Times is still talking about that. Now, Bernie Sanders didn't have a heart attack. He had stents put in his heart.
Well, he had a tiny heart attack.
Well, I mean, but let's be real. I mean, the way they're describing it, though, Daniel, is like he was out of commission. Well, it's just interesting how they write it. But they also shoehorn in Senator Elizabeth Warren and how she was at some points surging past him and how he got the endorsement or how she got the endorsement from the Workers' Family Party. But since then now, the New York Times is writing, Mr. Sanders has risen in the polls while Ms. Warren has plateaued. And one of the reasons is that a lot of progressives are right now separating Warren from Sanders. And one of the issues is that Sanders is gaining more of the progressive groups because they like the fact that he's been consistent with a lot of his policies, especially most notably his Medicare for All. Also, they do talk about how he got the endorsements from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashid Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar. And right now, the article also mentions how Mr. Sanders is often preferred by the party's more adherent activists who are not scared off by his willingness to buck Democratic traditions. So, I I really have to say, the article is mentioning Warren a lot in here, but it's also trying to indicate that, well, Sanders is the main front runner. So it's like it's a very interesting double standard. They're trying to make Warren relevant with progressives and saying that maybe it's a harder decision for progressives to get that endorsement or for progressives to figure out which candidate they would like to support. But at the end of the day, the article ends, we need the biggest distinction as possible, and we need someone who can clearly stand up to Trump. And a lot of the progressive groups that were interviewed by the New York Times are saying that Bernie Sanders has what it takes to build a momentum and actually has the character and political history to stand up to Trump and his administration. Daniel, Paul, I want to open this up to you guys.
I think as a critique of or a comment on the Bernie Sanders campaign strategy, they have maybe the best strategy that can move through the Democratic nominating process into the general election of any of the candidates, right? They have, basically a coalition-style strategy, a movement strategy, trying to bring people into the fold, trying to say, look, that his whole slogan is, it's not me, it's us, right? This system is broken. We need things that the people have been demanding for decades. And there's multiple levels of corruption and systematic injustices that prevent this from happening. He also speaks to some of the working class woes that plague those in the Rust Belt states, right? Which is kind of some key states that maybe were lost in the last election for maybe not wanting to abolish TPP or give a new form of NAFTA. Those type of policy ideas are the kind of things that play well across the aisle. And so I think anyone who's out there still implying that, okay, well, maybe you Democrats like him, but but he's too far left. The Democratic base might like it, but it's too far left for the rest of the country. Like, that's a tired argument. And it's obviously false.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have the New York Times, as always, doing this very interesting political take where it's, pretty obvious where the paper of record, whatever they call themselves, it won't be called that for much longer at the rate they're going. This is odd. This is, again, they can't ever just say, hey, Bernie Sanders is doing well.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
Well, see, even the way the title of the article, it almost seems like, okay, amid Bernie Sanders' resurgent, a progressive coalition endorses him. It's just odd wordplay. I mean, I would have just really...
The word amid.
Yeah. Amid sounds foreboding or something like, whoa, what's going on with Sanders? I mean, because like majority of people are just reading the headlines in this day and age of social media where we're just scrolling past headlines and everything else. And amid sounds just a little bit different. I mean, the way The Hill, for example, if you compare that article and how it's written, it just says Bernie Sanders gets endorsement of 50 coalition groups. And then that's it. You read it's a more simplified version.
It'd be like saying, despite massive popularity, many people voted for the candidate. Who would have thought? Like, wait, you're making it sound like those are two contradictory. Like, it would make sense if you said, despite massive popularity, the candidate didn't win a popular election. But you're saying two things that one seems to follow the other.
Yeah. What? And to Kit's point and Paul's point, 80%, generally speaking, 80% of written articles are only the title is read. As it's scrolled past on Facebook or whatever is out there, 20% of people actually read the article. So always remember that these article titles, they're usually written by someone completely different than the actual journalist, if it is a journalist that is writing those those pieces. So, are we really surprised that this is the title we're going for? And are we really surprised that the first thing they bring up is, he also, don't forget, a heart attack existed somewhere in the vicinity.
So here's, okay, so we kind of just talked about the article, but here's the main meat and bones of the story. Here's something that, you guys should take away from this, is that, once again, Bernie Sanders is getting more support from progressive groups and activists. 50 different progressive organizations are going to endorse Senator Bernie Sanders. They want him to be the nominee for this 2020 election cycle. They want him to be the main front runner. They're endorsing him. Once again, Bernie Sanders is building this coalition. I don't see Pete Buttigieg doing this. I don't see Biden doing this. And I don't see Warren or Cory Booker or Amy Klobuchar doing any of this. It's Bernie Sanders that's building the support with grassroots, independents, and progressives. And even conservatives too want to help support Bernie Sanders for him to get this nomination and to go on to the general election. it's gonna be really, really curious to see how corporate media is gonna start titling all their articles if Bernie Sanders gets a nomination. I think it's gonna be hilarious. But now we have to move on to our next story. So we're gonna read another article from the New York Times. It's an updated article about who Tulsi Gabbard is. But it's not really worth their time, but we're going to read it anyways because it just shows just how really out of touch they are, because there's a lot of stuff to talk about Tulsi Gabbard, but there's not a lot. And Daniel's going to read it, but I want to put this back on a wide shot because we're also going to be playing a video that was made by Matt Orfala. We interviewed him some time ago, myself and Paul, and it's very similar to the Bernie Sanders video that he did some time ago, but we can't play it, the full audio, because there's music in the background, and because YouTube and the way it is, this video will get flagged, and there could be some, consequences, repercussions towards our channel. But if you want to check out the full video, tomorrow at 10 a.m., this will be clipped, and you guys can check out the link to Matt Orfala's outstanding video on who Representative Tulsi Gabbard is. So we'll be talking about, you guys will get to see it. No sound will be playing, but I think it's apropos that we show this video, because as soon as Daniel starts reading this, once again, it proves to the point, corporate media has no idea who Tulsi Gabbard is. So, Daniel, take it away.
So yeah, real quick before we even start the video. So yeah, I'm going to be reading the article like normal, and we're going to kind of do a nice compare and contrast.
Oh, almost forgot to say, Tulsi time.
There will be Tulsi time, but okay, fine. I'll do a little Tulsi time before we start. Making me press all these extra buttons.
I'm sorry.
So many buttons.
This one, I love this one.
There we go. Tulsi time.
There we go.
Let's show them the video. No sound will be playing. We do apologize for that inconvenience.
I will be speaking though, so my sound will be playing. Haha. Go. Okay. So this is from the New York Times. Of course, the paper of notice we discussed. Wonderful, 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 except when they aren't, which is a lot. And this is their article that if you want to know who Tulsi Gabbard is and you go to the New York Times, this is what they're going to tell you. Who is Tulsi Gabbard? Miss Gabbard was deployed to Iraq and currently serves in the Hawaii as a major in the Hawaii National Guard. She has she has leaned on her background as a service member in making foreign policy her chief concern. Specifically, she is urging the United States to get out of foreign wars and discuss and focus on peace building, which is an interesting way of phrasing what she's doing. She also has warned that nuclear arms race could be on the horizon. No, she's arguing that it is currently happening. Now, some questions. If you want to know about Tulsi Gabbard and you have no idea who she is, what does the New York Times say about her? Where does she stand on foreign policy? Miss Gabbard doesn't fit neatly into any one established ideology or school of thought. She generally does not endorse meddling with dictators. She thinks the threat from Russia is severely exaggerated. She wants to stop beating the drums of war with Iran, and she would prefer to make nice with North Korea. It's a very interesting way of putting, especially making nice with North Korea. Anyway, I will continue. This is the paper of record, after all. Wasn't she the one that met with Bashar Assad? This is literally the second thing that they bring up. This is literally like, hey, if you want to know about her, here's... Anyway, Miss Gabbard visited Syria's President Bashar al-Assad in Damascus in January 2017. Now, that's not actually factually correct. She went on a fact-finding mission and was approached by his government, and they said, we're going to talk with you, come with us, which is a very, very, very different thing. Something other American officials have not done since reports emerged of Mr. Assad's use of chemical weapons against civilians. Now, we've also covered this, and Paul's done a lot of work, that increasingly is becoming questioned as to whether or not it happened or who carried it out. So another issue with the paper of record. She defended the move as a way to help broker peace. Critics have called her actions un-American after Miss Gabbard sharply criticized Senator Kamala Harris for her prosecutorial record during one of the Democratic debates. Miss Harris called Gabbard. I love how they're like, oh, this one thing that she did well, we're going to also get into. Miss Gabbard was called a apologist for an individual, Assad, who has murdered the people of his country like cockroaches, similar to what Kamala did to the students and the parents of kids in California.
Yeah.
And then they give this very interesting third one. And again, these are once I'm done with this is it. There's no more that gets written about her. So the final question is, the point they want to make about Tulsi Gabbard is, speaking of debates, why wasn't she in the September debate? Short answer, she didn't qualify. Slightly longer answer, she needed 2% in 4 polls that the Democratic National Committee counted towards debate qualification. After that, it's like, hey, if you want to look up other stuff, click on these other links. But that is it. That's all the New York. If you're going to look up the New York Times and it's going to say, here's about Tulsi Gabbard, that's it. What do you think, guys?
Okay, so there's a couple of things that I would like to inform the New York Times since they choose to ignore what she's accomplished so far. Well, Representative Tulsi Gabbard successfully called out Hillary Clinton and her hypocrisy, and is actually one of the few Democrats to actually step up and to really challenge basically a figurehead of neoliberalism and centralism here in the United States, especially within the Democratic Party. Tulsi Gabbard is one of the few presidential candidates to actually be in an active lawsuit against Google due to the fact that Google, not once, but twice, helped hide information about who Tulsi Gabbard is and her campaign. I mean, it's basically they just made sure that if people were curious about Tulsi Gabbard, no information was being seen about Tulsi Gabbard. The New York Times ignored the fact that Tulsi Gabbard successfully knocked out Kamala Harris, who has an extremely questionable record, most notably incarcerating a large portion of the African-American population within the state of California, and Kamala Harris's close ties with the prison industrial complex. The New York Times is ignoring the fact that Tulsi Gabbard managed to basically shatter Pete Buttigieg's image. Everyone's ignoring the fact that Tulsi Gabbard is one of the few people to acknowledge the election fraud during the 2016 primary when she stepped down as vice chair to the DNC because what she saw was wrong and corrupt. Tulsi Gabbard is somebody that a lot of Americans, not just liberals and progressives, but conservatives, libertarians, and independents really are drawn towards. And remember, there's a media blackout on Tulsi Gabbard. And anytime they could smear her with being a Russian asset or an Assad apologist, it's a way to destroy somebody's character. Remember, Tulsi Gabbard served 16 years honorably in the Hawaiian National Guard. Yet, all what the media can do is smear. And remember, the DNC chooses which polls they want so that a candidate can qualify in the debate. She could have made it to the September debate. And guess what? She's very close to make it for the 6th Democratic debate as well. But she made her decision to not participate in because, let's face it, to quote Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Tulsi Gabbard, both being on Joe Rogan's show, they both said the exact same thing. And I think we all know the truth, the hard truth, and that is the debates are demeaning. So it's very interesting that the New York Times was updated that, but left out so much important information. But that's why we're here. That's why independent media exists, because now more than ever, we have to call out the establishment media for their own hypocrisy.
So one more thing that Prime mentioned in chat, which I thought was a fantastic point, is that the longer answer why she was on the debate, or part of the reason, is she got deployed. I completely forgot that she was deployed to Indonesia. And that hurt her poll numbers because people are like, where's this Tulsi Gabbard person? New York Times didn't mention that. Paul?
Yeah, I think one of the things I want to push back on, and I think the Matt Orfalea video that you just saw there makes a really good point of...
Mind you, that's a really good video, too.
It's a fantastic video. He just does great videos. He's top notch. Yeah. You do really need to hear it with the audio because it makes the rhetorical points much better. One of the things that strikes me is very interesting is this, she's a Russian apologist. She sounds very Kremlin-y. It sounds like these talking points. So she's going to do things that help Russia. This is the way that logic goes. It's predicated on a zero-sum thinking about foreign policy. And that is, if someone advocates for anything that would in any way be advantageous to Russia, and we don't like them, we can claim that they're a Russian apologist, or that they are acting on behalf of the Kremlin, or at the very least are an unwitting, useful idiot. And here's the problem with that zero-sum type thinking. Tulsi Gabbard is advocating for less war in the world, advocating for peace, for less regime change, right? To stop the United States unipolar, world hegemonic empire march. How is world peace something that is somehow bad for America? Why is it that anything that is good for Russia, world peace would be good for everyone, right? But do we have to not like world peace because it would be good for Russia? Is that a Kremlin talking point now? Is world peace a Kremlin talking point?
You caught Putin's devastating plan. World peace for everyone. Puppies for some, American flags for others. Yeah, guys, that was Putin's plan the whole time. Have world peace so he can undermine world peace. Mental gymnastics all around. I don't know. So whenever you have a candidate that's actually talking about real progressive change, the media is going to do their job to smear that candidate and tear them down. But as it stands right now, look, Representative Tulsi Gabbard, she's not going anywhere. I mean, look, Kamala Harris had a huge amount of resources, and she's now out of the race and shut down all her, campaign offices. But yet Tulsi Gabbard is continuing to gain momentum. You know, she's doing good in a lot of the polls, but yet these polls are not being counted, nor are they being acknowledged as, that people like Representative Tulsi Gabbard. They like what she is saying, and they want to hear her on the debate stage. So, well done, DNC. Well done, corporate media, for trying to smear a candidate, but it's not working, and Tulsi Gabbard isn't going to apologize. And one final note, awesome job, Matt Orfalea, for that video on Tulsi Gabbard, because, you know what, once again, it shows that the media is once again failing at its job. Tulsi Gabbard is not a Russian asset. She's not an Assad apologist. She is a sitting congresswoman who served 16 years honorably in the Hawaiian National Guard. She's not a traitor. She's doing her job as a civil servant and trying to win the nomination for for the Democratic Party so that she can go on to the general election. I think with the amount of trials and tribulations that she has gone through, I'm impressed with her courage and her willingness not to snap at every single reporter asking her, are you going to run for a third party? Are you going to run for a third party? I mean, she can answer that question 1 million times, 2 million times, 10 million times, infinity, and they're still going to ask her that same damn fucking question. It's getting ridiculous.
You know what's stupid is that the assumption is that she will. The assumption is that she's lying about that, and that as soon as she does not win the Democratic nomination, she's going to begin campaigning against Democrats specifically and try to throw the election toward Trump. And it's like, but based on what? Why have you come to that conclusion? You've asked this question very specifically, incessantly, and gotten extremely clear answers about it. How come you don't give her the credit for the answer that she's given you? How come you deny her own words? Why?
Well, Paul, I mean, obviously the New York Times wrote it, and they were quoting the Washington Post, which was quoting the New York Times, which was quoting the Washington Post, which was quoting the New York Times.
Oh, they quoted themselves enough times, which made it true. Yes. I forgot how that works.
Even though there's two interesting caveats. Number one, Tulsi Gabbard signed a document with the DNC, a pledge, indicating that she is not going to run third party. You know, I remember when corporate media was saying that Bernie Sanders was going to run third party. That never happened in 2016. Tulsi Gabbard's not running for third party in his 2020 election cycle at all. And not to mention, number two, we have covered third party candidates here at Heartlands Media. It's very difficult to run a third party campaign, especially if you're with the Greens or Libertarians or whatever kind of party. It's a huge monumental task. And this short amount of time frame, you would require a numerous amount of resources just to effectively even get on any kind of ballot or we get onto the debate stage as well. It's just ridiculous. And
well,
just
you're
to
not
make
getting
it clear,
onto the debate stage.
Yeah.
No matter what, if you're not in one of the two major parties.
And if you try and attend, you'll be handcuffed to a chair.
Exactly.
Yeah, just ask Dr. Jill Stein. So, final note, Tulsi Gabbard, if you really want to learn more about her, check out her previous interviews, especially like on Joe Rogan or Jimmy Dore. Check out Matt Orfalea's video. Again, apologies for the fact that we couldn't play the audio, but I mean, it's really good. And then
subscribe to his channel.
Yeah.
He's great.
Yeah, check him out. Yeah, he's done
He's
some
awesome.
great work. So, Matt, awesome job for actually bringing truth to power because corporate media is not doing its job. But that's why we're here. Independent media leading the way. Daniel, what's the final word? Oh, Duck Moore. No one has done more for Russia than the Clintons. $3 billion tax dollars in 1993 for Yeltsin meddling. Reset button 2009. Uranium 1 2010.
Yeah, people forget that when Hillary first ran against Sanders in 2016, the biggest weakness that they perceived was her connections with Russia. So what did she do?
Her campaigns. Yeah.
And so what did they do? They gaslit everyone else, and we are still living with that gas explosion, let's call it, to this day, where right now the House is trying to impeach Trump for Ukraine because they couldn't get Russia. It's all of this could have been avoided, but it wasn't.
Yep. So now moving on to another story about Venezuela, which reminds me, Paul, we're going to have to do our review on
It
Jack
is forthcoming.
Ryan.
We have, oh man, it's going to be long.
Because you're not going to hear about a nuclear Venezuela, Paul, because you'll be dead. But also, now journalists are right now trying to demonize Venezuela in another way. What are they doing, Paul? What are they doing in Venezuela?
What is happening in Venezuela? Yeah, so this is an interesting story that comes to us from the Gray Zone. And an interesting and very unusually open interview with a sort of Western media reporter that's based in Caracas. So the article says, one Caracas-based correspondent now working for the New York Times told me on the record that he employs sexy tricks to hook readers on dubious articles demonizing the socialist government of Venezuela. Anatoly Kurmanev, which is totally an American-sounding name. I wonder why they're not trying to go after him for Russia reasons. But he made this revealing comment and many more during the interview I conducted with him for my PhD book on the media coverage of Latin America. At the time, he was a correspondent for Bloomberg and had just published a very dubious story on how condoms supposedly cost $750 per pack in Venezuela. The misleading article was picked up and repeated across the media, describing himself and his colleagues as mercenaries. Kurmanev was unabashed, boasting on tape that he essentially grossly exaggerates stories in the media. Quote, "A couple of times from my experience, you try to use, I wouldn't call them cheap tricks, but yeah, kind of sexy tricks. Just last week, we had a story about condom shortages in Venezuela, and the official exchange rate, condoms were like $750 or something, and the headline was something like $750 condom in Venezuela, and everyone clicks it, and everyone says, Jesus, why do they sell it for like $750? He said, once you click, the average reader is hooked, and he'll read about really important issues like HIV prevention problems in Venezuela and teen pregnancies and social impact of lack of contraception, the public health impact, things I do feel are important to tell the world. But you have to use sexy tactics to do it." He goes on to talk about how Western media has had a demonstrable effect on the economy of Venezuela, that the sanctions and embargoes have, well, the embargo wasn't in place at the time, but between 2017 and 2018, we can attribute 40,000 deaths in Venezuela to the sanctions that came from the U.S. government. And the U.S. government and U.S. media has repeatedly referred to Maduro as a dictator and part of a troika of tyranny, also invoking Russia, and has sponsored multiple coup attempts there, including one in November. So what's interesting is, let's see, where does he get into this? The condoms cost $750 thing. We don't learn until the 9th paragraph of the article that a pack of condoms actually cost about the same as it did in the United States at the time. At the latter piece of the pseudo-news is based on a deliberate distortion of the country's admittedly Byzantine currency regulations and its effect on demonizing the government and socialism in general, advancing the idea that something must be done to help them. So they're taking a kind of wonky, weird currency exchange rule, extrapolating it to a consumer item that has to do with sex because that's going to get people to click on it. They weren't finding that condoms cost this much. They were taking a corner piece, rule in the government maybe wasn't great. You could write an article about, hey, maybe their currency exchange could use some smoothing out because it has some inefficiencies here or there. But no, we need to tell everyone that there aren't adequate prophylactics to use in Venezuela and there are teen pregnancies all over the place as a result of it, which is not true. You're just making that up. The article goes on to talk about how this reporter went on to report in Bolivia and did essentially the same things. According to the correspondent's narrative, according RE Bolivia, which conveniently echoed Washington's official live, the ouster of Morales left a power vacuum that reluctant Áñez was forced to fill with a transitional government. That's completely omitting the fact that there was a military coup that installed that person. It wasn't a power vacuum, it was a coup. They go to great lengths to not refer to it as a coup. He's pointing out basically the terms in which these reporters are going to Venezuela, and I thought the closing paragraphs of the article were very telling. It says, with pressure from all sides to serve as stenographers for right-wing opposition movements, many Western correspondents exist in a cultural bubble, almost entirely isolated from the poor and working class populations that support leftist governments across Latin America. Western reporters almost universally live and work in the richest areas of capital cities from Venezuela to Mexico, often in gated communities, surrounded by armed guards, and rarely venture into the poorer areas where the majority of people live. Some of the corporate media's top correspondents confided to me that they could not even speak Spanish for months after they got there, and were therefore unable to converse with the bottom 90 to 95% of the population. They are essentially parachuted in to opposition strongholds to work with opposition activists and naturally take that side of the debate. With all of these factors in mind, the cheerleading across the U.S. press for regime change in Bolivia and Venezuela can hardly be seen as an accident. Too many journalists at corporate media outlets tend to see themselves as the ideological shock troops in an information war against supposedly tyrannical socialist governments, passing off regime change propaganda as unbiased news, and all in a day's work for those embracing their role as servants of the empire. This is the thing, right? This is what it takes if you want to be successful in the current world of Western journalism. Find out what the government line is, find a way to echo it incessantly, uncritically, be a stenographer for those in power, and you will get a pat on the head and a fat paycheck. You'll get those nice corner offices at the New York Times or the Washington Post. You spend a couple of years doing your, slumming it in a foreign country where things are really difficult. But don't worry, they're going to put you in a gated community and give you armed guards, and you don't have to speak the language and just talk to our friends over here in the opposition, all of these rich people that want to make sure that they overthrow this socialist government because, they're not making nearly as much money as when they controlled the oil company. This fucking socialist government's privatizing the goddamn oil. God damn it. And how do we feel about the fact that, of course that's the position that they take. That's the opinion that they've come away with. That they're, first of all, trying to be sycophantic to their own government. And the only people they're talking to in a foreign government are the wealthiest and most interested parties and completely politically biased in every way. It's no wonder that we aren't getting the straight dope out of what's happening in Latin America.
All right, so I'm going to keep my response because we're on a time, time element. But I want to make it very clear that with this entire coverage of this crisis in Venezuela, I'm very happy that there's an article like The Gray Zone out there that's actually bringing attention to this, and more importantly, acknowledging the fact that corporate media is profiting off this system. And also shout out to our super chat, Doug Moore, 50 nations back Guaido, UN 193 nations, 25%. So,
one thing that I think that inadvertently they are the shock troops. I mean, these are what modern era shock troops look like. They aren't soldiers. It's even before the soldiers. It's the Western journalist that goes in and for years builds up a reputation of, he's the guy that we know that's from the New York Times, that's in the this area of the world. He's the guy we can trust. He's this reputable source, and he's a New York Times reporter that's going to tell us everything that's happening. And then as soon as you ask them what's going on, it's, well, actually, don't talk to the people. I don't know what's going on. I really talk to the people that are trying to overthrow the government, and I know I'm slumming it out here until I can get back and get a really nice...
Yeah.
Check out my sexy tricks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's manufacturing consent. It's manufacturing reality. And we are, as America, as Americans, and as American companies, literally doing the exact same thing that we say that we're out there to correct. Instead of saying to people, here's what the truth is, I know it, I've looked at all the sides, I'm literally going to be the propaganda that I chastise against.
So just think about it. How many articles were written in the past where you have these reporters that are in these hostile foreign countries talking about a dictator that we have to overthrow? Think about all the articles that were written, how many wars that we've gotten ourselves into because of articles saying that, this dictator's doing this, or it costs this much to have toilet paper or water in this country. I mean, it's just horrible journalism, and that's why we exist here at Heartlands Media, because we have to bring this to light. And thankfully, the Gray Zone brought that to attention too, because
they're so fantastic.
Yeah, they are. They are great. And the thing is, it's important for us to remember that if we're going to stop these regime change wars, we have to reorganize how the media is presented to the American people, because the media's job is to inform the people about what's happening. And if there is a dictator out there that's oppressing his people, yeah, we should know about it. But don't put us into a country where we're just there just to take another country's resources. We wouldn't like it if somebody did that to us. And let's face it, if you look at America's track record, we had the highest incarcerated population in the free world. We're polluting our rivers, our soil, our air. We're contaminating our entire environment. Our infrastructure is falling apart. And we have such a corrupt, inept neoliberal system. We could kind of use a much-needed reform here, so maybe some freedom, but I guess we're not going to get it because, according to corporate media, everything's fine and peachy here. Daniel.
I want to add just a final note on this, and that is just take a step back. I kind of just realized this is obvious, but I think it needs to be said. What kind of super oppressive dictatorship are you in where you can openly write against the country for years and years and years with no repercussions?
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I got to mention one more thing from the super chat. No, it's not a super chat, but from the regular chat. Holly Horn, Venezuela has more oil than Saudi Arabia. You have no idea
That's
how
the
many
real
times.
crime.
You don't have no idea how many times that's mentioned in the season 2 of Jack Ryan. That's mentioned at least 3 or 4 times, I think.
They have
in that
more
first
oil
episode.
reserves than any country on the planet.
Yeah. They mention it a lot in that episode. Me and Paul are going to do a review on that season, but Paul's slugging through it. I watched the whole thing. You are going to laugh at the ending. I'm
going through it slowly because I have far too many pages of notes. Far too many.
All right. So now we're moving on to our next story. Guys, I'm proud to say this. It has to deal with the December 19th debate. We are going to be covering it here at Heartlands Media. But Andrew Yang has qualified for the 6th Democratic debate. This is a Quinnipiac poll, Quinnipiac University poll that was released Tuesday. And he made the final cut. He got to 4%. So congratulations to Andrew Yang and his campaign. I find it very interesting, though, in this same poll, Bloomberg gets 5%. The candidate who just got into the race, who is a Republican, not a Democrat, running in a Democratic primary, gets 5%. I mean, granted, it was acknowledged by the DNC, so congratulations to Yang for being on the stage. I think his voice is needed. But I find it interesting, especially from this article from the NPR, the upstart entrepreneur and nonprofit executive becomes the 7th and likely final candidate to make it for the December 19th debate. And it's great that they acknowledge it and they acknowledge the other candidates. But then the article then goes on to mention something else. It's kind of hilarious in a way. They mentioned Tulsi Gabbard. Hawaiian Representative Tulsi Gabbard, who has stalked out a much more conservative and controversial position within the primary, needs only 1 poll to qualify, but she announced Monday night on Twitter that she wouldn't even attend even if she met the requirements. And again, another smear on Tulsi Gabbard. Like, you're calling her conservative and controversial. What has she done that's controversial? I mean, let's not forget that the media has also been doing a blackout on Andrew Yang and Senator Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard for quite some time. In fact, all 3 of those candidates have had some limited speaking times during those debates. I mean, we sat through them all. I mean, in the last 2 debates, at least Andrew Yang was able to speak more. But even then, it was barely enough compared to the favoritism shown to Biden or Warren.
And by speak more, we mean less.
Yeah. So there we go. So I like how they mentioned this at the very end. Yang has campaigned as a nerd who loves math and warned about the dangers of automation to the economy. Why are they saying like he campaigned as a nerd? You could say he's campaigning more of a mathematician. He's campaigning as an entrepreneur. And granted, there's some policies and things I don't like about from Andrew Yang, but I mean, there are some issues that he's talking about. I have some concerns about automation and AI and its role that it'll play in our economy. But you could be a little bit more nicer towards the candidate.
Yeah,
I mean,
this is literally like, okay, let's get back to like, what was it like when I was bullying kids in high school? All right, let me just write that down.
Yeah.
It's Yang is doing good. He is literally come out of nowhere. And I think it was Paul, you made this point a show or 2 ago, that the real threat that that is perceived with Andrew Yang is this is a guy that literally was like, I'm going to run for president. I got some ideas. There's some different ideas. Let's see how this goes. And now he's doing really, really well.
And not to mention too, Daniel, there's a lot of evidence showing that the media has been blacking out Andrew Yang, and we also mentioned for Tulsi Gabbard and Senator Bernie Sanders. And I'm glad that he made it on the debate stage. I think he'll add a little bit more fire and some more interesting talking points with the other candidates. I know Tom Steyer's going to be there. I don't know how the hell he's there. Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, who's falling apart, Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Warren, and former Vice President Joe Biden will be there. So at least now we have another voice and somebody who I do hope will actually bring out some of his talking points and, challenge some more of the establishment candidates.
I think this is, I can't shake like how the hell did Bloomberg poll so high kind of things. It's like, how did Tom Steyer get that many unique donations? It's that same
It's called
kinda,
money, Paul.
It rhymes with millions. It's billions.
Yeah, so it's one of those like, we keep saying that polling is a very, very flawed metric, and yet here we are using it to qualify people for the debate stage. So we're put in a position of simultaneously really hoping that the candidates that we like actually get the polling numbers they need to make it, but at the same time going, but these polls are kind of BS anyway. and then we see Bloomberg. I don't know. It's very conflicting.
Yeah.
But it's not just that everything you said with the polls. It's that on top of that, then the DNC is like, well, we have 10 polls in front of us. I like that one, that one, that one, not that one, not that one, not that one, not that one.
Right. I mean,
so like Tulsi has now qualified twice in polls that were normally reputable, normally acceptable to get into these debates. And the DNC is like, no, not this time.
Yep.
But their methodology didn't change, and that's a problem.
But the good news is Andrew Yang actually qualified, and I think it's very good for his campaign to get his message out there. Better him than somebody like Bloomberg, even though Bloomberg has not met any of the qualifications. But for some reason, 5%, just like that. Just a quick reminder, Andrew Yang is an entrepreneur and a businessman, but he's running in the Democratic primary. Bloomberg has history with the Republican Party. Bloomberg has a lot of controversy around him. Stop and frisk as being the most notable. But there's millions of other issues about Bloomberg. But somehow he gets 5%, and the DNC is saying it's okay to run in our primary. He's a Democrat, apparently, according to them. But it's okay to smear Andrew Yang or Tulsi Gabbard or Bernie Sanders because, those candidates are challenging the establishment. And the DNC has to protect its status quo because they think that everyone's going to fall in line and vote blue no matter who. Don't
Bernie
give me that
isn't
BS.
really even a Democrat.
Yeah, whatever.
But guess who is? Bloomberg, who was just Republican until yesterday.
Right. Yeah. So now, everyone, let's get on a wide shot. It's time to kind of Biden it up, folks.
Oh, you got me a little
the buttons.
publicly.
The buttons.
This one.
This one. Oh, so we're going to talk about good old Uncle Joe Biden. Oh, boy. That's so weird.
So we have one of the most... I'm trying to think how to even explain it. There's so much to get into. But I think the best way to do it...
There's no malarkey in here, guys.
There's no malarkey except everywhere there is malarkey. So let's just get into it, guys. Hunter Biden's name is ringing throughout the political universe, from the halls of Congress to the annals of social media and the cornfields of Iowa. Ooh, very picturesque. Messing with former Vice President Joe Biden's no malarkey mojo in the Democratic presidential race. By the way, the 1950s called. They want their terms back. The 49-year-old has emerged as a central character in the impeachment inquiry on Capitol Hill, and is complicating life for Mr. Biden on the campaign trail. Questions about Hunter's tabloid-worthy personal life, as well as his cushy position, which is apparently nothing wrong according to Joe Biden, and on a Ukraine energy company, are mudding his father's message, which was already mud. So what's muddy mud? I don't know. It is frustrating because it is the kind of thing that people know is going to get under his skin. This is referring to Joe Biden. It is going to irritate him, so they're going to do it more and more. It is part of a no-holds-barred scrutiny that comes with running for the highest office in the land. By refusing to acknowledge, refusing to engage on what his son knew, what he actually did, by ignoring and not addressing it, Biden is putting himself in the same position as John Kerry in 2004. But old habits from long-established politicians like John Kerry and Joe Biden are hard to shake. As fate would have it, Mr. Kerry, who endorsed Biden last week, joined him in New Hampshire over the weekend on his No Malarkey tour bus through Iowa. If you saw that facepalm, that really nice picture on that. He was not happy he's there. We had some ideas that it might be because they didn't want him to run. They're like, just come here, come to join us. Anyway, where Biden said he didn't know what Hunter Biden did to earn $50,000 a month. On the board of the oil company when he was vice president. It's amazing that they just never talked about it over dinner. I don't know. We'll see. He was asked if he wants to get to the bottom of it. He told Axios, no, because I trust my son. In fact, there's nothing on his face that he did wrong. He said, look, if you really want to talk about problems in the ready, we're going to do a pivot. Let's talk about the Trump family. I mean, come on. I mean, it seems like he knows more about what the Trump's kids are doing than his own son, which is kind of a issue in and of itself. Anyway, he says there's not one bit of evidence, not one little teeny bit to say anything wrong was done, except his son also has said that he was wrong and should have done it differently, but I'm not going to get in Biden's way of stepping on his own shoes. But you keep asking me these questions. The campaign also featured a headline-grabbing showdown with a 83-year-old man, we covered that a little bit ago, who accused Biden of selling access to the president and landing Hunter, who had no experience in the energy business. Biden, of course, in the very tactful, diplomatic way that we know him. Called him, "You're a damn liar. That's not true." Biden snapped. A little week earlier, Biden had another tense exchange, this time with a reporter who asked him to comment on a woman's claims that a paternity test proves Hunter is the father of her baby. He said, "No, that's a private matter. I have no comment." I'm sure if that happened with like Ivanka, it would have been a thing he thought would have been relevant to draw up, but that's neither here nor there. And he says to this woman, "Only you would ask that. You're a good man, classy." It was the latest in a series of ugly headlines about Hunter Biden, who has a crack cocaine habit and a romantic relationship with his brother's widow. Several officials acknowledged that Hunter Biden's business dealings in Ukraine were suspect and posed a potential conflict of interest for his father. Senate Republicans are talking about calling Hunter Biden and his father to testify if impeachment reaches the upper chamber, which we know it probably will. So again, Democrats, you can quote me later on this, Democrats have just set themselves up for Republicans to take in all the witnesses that they want and really just destroy Joe Biden faster than it would have happened organically. But nonetheless, it's what's going to probably happen. Here's my guess, is that when eventually Biden leaves the race, everyone is going to say when it happens that it wasn't because Biden was a bad candidate. He was in the wrong era. He took big corporate money. He told huge blocks of voters to just go literally fuck themselves. They're going to say he would have won if it wasn't for his son.
So, Biden, somehow the front runner. He's a clean and clear candidate. He has no shady dealings. I mean, everything's fine about Biden. Don't worry about Biden. Corporate media has been screaming from the rooftop since his primary started that Biden has us in the bag. But no, the real truth is this. Every time Biden speaks, every time Biden talks about any kind of issue at all, he is clearly out of touch. Biden is saying, fuck you to voters. There are 3 different separate occasions, but more occasions right now even coming up of Biden being disrespectful to potential voters and constituents. I mean, he is literally somebody that if he gets the nomination, if the DNC commits election fraud and decide to go all in for Biden, he will lose to somebody like Trump. And don't count on the impeachment of getting rid of Trump because that's not going to help either. And Biden's been the one that's been rooting for it. He's going to fail miserably, and the only person that's been destroying Biden is not only himself, but also his past, and dare I say it, even his own son now too, because Biden isn't the answer. He's just a continuing problem of neoliberalism. Paul.
I think we'll see Biden eventually drop out of this race after Iowa and New Hampshire and polling results start coming in, like actual primaries, actual caucus results start coming in. And we no longer get to have news reporters going, "Hey, well, this just in from the 1950s. Everybody loves Biden." Like, that's not going to work once people actually vote. So it's one of these things that I just cringe every time I see them saying, "But he's so presidential," and "Don't you remember he was Obama's vice president?" and "Oh, he's so great, he's so likable." It's weird that everyone hates him and everyone says that he should have some kind of policy position on something. How dare you want policy positions on things?
Yeah. So go figure. I mean, that's just the problem with Biden and his entire campaign and who he is as a person. And somehow the DNC feels that he's the guy to carry the standard. But now we're going to move on to our final story. Paul, this has to deal with the white helmets.
White helmets
what's
in
going
Syria.
on,
Paul? This Vanessa Beeley does these incredible, in-depth reports where she chronicles the ins and outs of all kinds of little bits of major geopolitical news that you maybe hadn't really gotten the whole story on, or you've gotten a sort of a skewed version of. And she takes a deep dive here, as there was some recent news in the middle of November that kind of went a little bit under the radar. And it's a name that you may not even be all that familiar with, but he was a major, major player in informing the Western media narrative around who the white helmets were and what the United States and Western countries' position towards Syria should be. He's a man by the name of James Lemasurier. He's got a hard, weird last name. British guy. On November 11th, this is Vanessa Beeley, On November 11, 2019, the British founder of the notorious White Helmets, James Le Mesurier, died in Istanbul, Turkey. The circumstances surrounding his death immediately elicited a flurry of Turkish and corporate media reports, many of them contradictory. As the details of the final hours came to light, Mark Urban, the diplomatic editor at BBC Newsnight, immediately tweeted that, quote, a former colleague had told him that it was impossible to, quote, fall from that balcony, referencing Le Mesurier's reported cause of death, and intimated that there may have been, quote, state involvement. Urban did not identify his mysterious, quote, former colleague or explain what made him sufficiently qualified to conclude that Le Mesurier's death may have been a state-sanctioned hit. Urban declared ignorance over Le Mesurier's suspected ties to Britain's MI6 intelligence agency, then suggesting that, quote, black propaganda campaign by Russian and Syrian media and their social media acolytes against Le Mesurier was, quote, a prelude to murder. Emphasis added. It's in bold in the article. Extraordinary claims for a journalist to make prior to the publication of an official autopsy. Urban deleted his tweets soon after, maintaining that, quote, there is a good deal of suspicion that it may have been murder by a state actor, but that others suggest he may have taken his own life. Did Urban jump the gun? Was he instructed to delete these tweets? If so, by whom? So this is part one of a multi-part report. It's very, very long, and Vanessa Beeley goes into numerous different news articles that were either altered immediately after his death or deleted or removed. The fact that his Wikipedia page was deleted, or not deleted, but altered significantly after his death. There are a couple of really interesting things. Basically, all ties between him and the White Helmets are trying to be scrubbed from all news articles to make it very, very difficult to find any connection there. Also, his wife continues to run a partner agency that they've been trying to distance from each other, even though they both operate out of the exact same office building, called the Mayday Rescue. That's an interesting one. And so what he's done in the course of his actions in Syria is essentially launder gobs of money from the U.S. government and the British governments to various groups of the, quote, moderate rebels, right, that were operating in Syria. Al-Nusra, Jabhat al-Islam, a lot of these moderate groups that had demonstrable ties to Al-Qaeda and ISIS and were honestly not behaving in that capacity. The White Helmets themselves were propped up in major, major fashion. The leader of the White Helmets famously was denied entry into the United States in 2016 because, boy, the leader of the White Helmets, this humanitarian group, is odd that he's on a terrorist watch list. That's an odd thing to be denied entry into the United States. An interesting point that all of this trying to distance themselves from this particular person and keep people from looking into it is interesting. Also, in the British government's statement about his death, they say, quote, we are deeply saddened by the news of the death of James Le Mesurier. Our condolences go out to his family and friends at this difficult time. So why no mention of his wonderful work? Funny that, considering that Le Mesurier was awarded an OBE, or Officer of Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, in 2016 for his life-saving work. So this amidst a bunch of articles now claiming that there is no connection between Le Mesurier and the British government, or MI5 or MI6, and that there is no connection between him and the White Helmets, when it's obvious and clear that he indeed was an MI6 agent and indeed did found the White Helmets. This is a fascinating series. It's way too long and has way too many interesting twists and turns all the way through. And there are gobs of information, but it covers everything from the Syrian gas attacks and misinformation campaigns that surrounded them, the White Helmets and the misinformation campaigns that surrounded them, including things like the Netflix documentary that ended up getting an Oscar, even though it's propped up. It's an obvious and flagrant piece of Western media propaganda, and the demonstrable ties and money laundering and malfeasance that this person perpetrated. And his death is surrounded by pretty mysterious circumstances,
Similar
right?
to Epstein, I would assume.
Right. I mean, this is a person who it seems that a lot of this money laundering and these massive, massive amounts of money that he was handling certainly there's a pretty big temptation for some defrauding to go on, and it looks like there were some investigations into the misuse of the money that was, I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars passed through this guy's hands. And so some people are saying, well, he was stressed out because he was under investigation because of this, and it may have been a suicide, so that's speculation. But regardless of exactly what the circumstances around his death actually were, the fact that his news history is literally being scrubbed immediately is telling. And it's sort of like, if you go back to the pre-internet age, I was thinking about this earlier. In the pre-internet age, newspapers would be cataloged. You could find them in libraries, on microfilm. You could go look at them. It's not an easy thing to go and omit or delete or alter a story. The benefit that the government has is it's hard to go find a story, hard to go look something up. If you're like, man, I need to find this thing. I need to go through every newspaper article I can find from this time period and anything, I have to manually search for it. So that's sort of a built-in, keep people from looking too deep into it. But in an age when you can search things that are cataloged using search engine optimization and find articles from multiple different publications from anything that's been digitized and is available on the internet, you could find stuff. So how do you handle that? How do you hide behind the obscurity of that? Well, you've got to go alter that information. And she highlights multiple instances of actual news articles that have either been retracted, no longer available online, or altered in some way. And that is telling about who this person was.
Right.
Well, I mean, Paul, this all seems pretty straightforward that something happened, but, as a spokesperson for the government, nothing's wrong. Don't worry about it. Look the other way. Go do something else.
Do you have any sexy tactics you can use with that one?
Here we go. Let's talk about condom prices in Venezuela again.
Yeah. And so once again, just think back to all the articles that were written praising the White Helmets. Think about that Netflix documentary that won an Academy Award. All of a sudden, all these people that were saying all these high praises about the White Helmets are now quiet and trying to rewrite history. Very similar to how you have newspaper articles, re-editing their stories. Just like, just kind of mentioned Tulsi Gabbard, how New York Times switched Russians to Republicans, even though Hillary Clinton said Russians. So again, but this is more insidious. They're trying to make sure to cover up their footprints. They're trying to cover up the evidence. When you had people like, similar to media outlets like Hard Lens Media, like Jimmy Dore, who was calling out the White Helmets, people were saying that he was crazy, out of touch. Well, I guess he got it right. And all the great champions, the great keen-eyed eagles in the establishment media got it wrong. What else are they getting wrong? And how else are they misinforming you? This once again proves why we need independent media, now more than ever. So now...
Very quickly, I just want to respond to a super chat from Life at Brian. Thank you for the $9.99. I just checked in. So you talked about the OPCW fraud. You looked scared about talking about it before. Kudos. And DCK Punk actually does a good job of answering that. We talk about it all the time, but we're also dealing with Google's algorithm, YouTube's algorithm. So we don't post them in clips. So maybe that's what you're talking about. But this is basically Paul's forte. So watch the live show.
I get a lot of shit from friends about this one. How dare I not believe that Assad gassed his own people? And all of this stuff, and it's like I have a critical eye toward news media from all sources.
Gee, Paul, remember when Iraq had weapons of mass destruction?
Yeah, and they didn't.
Oh, right. Oh, well, again, proof why we need independent media, and we want to thank you guys.
I want to say, it's a
yeah.
good thing the White Helmets verified all that stuff, so no problems.
There we go. So now we are going to be taking a short break. We got an exclusive interview with a former aldermanic candidate who's also an entrepreneur here in the city of Chicago, Teresa Sau. She ran in the 26th district in the city of Chicago during the 2019 Chicago municipal elections. But real quick, we want to thank our Patreon supporters and our YouTube subscribers who are helping us build this channel up. We cannot thank you guys enough. If you want to help out Hard Lens Media and support independent media, please consider being a Patreon supporter. Your support will help us get better gear so we can make better quality content. You guys are making this channel happen, and we can't thank you guys enough. Now, the list is getting longer, but one of the perks is we read your name. So, with that being said, shout out to Myra Landa Sanchez, Ishmael Rufus, Carlos Rosero, Alan Marone, Pian Timpson, Judy Moreau, Gregory Church, Kira McCown, Cassie Lloyd, Denise Gibson, Unknown Space Pioneer, Lawrence Johnson, Michael, Midwest Toker, Volker, Chase, Sandra and Grayson, NC Schaffner, NC Nelson, Teresa Collins, Brittany Cabrera, Desmond Turk, Jack Moore, Sandra Mayer, Giffy, Lewis, Ariana Hinton, Michael Ealing, Emily, Eric Unger, Freethinker59, Todd Adams, Ramon Lazo, Kerry Barber, Alexis Haas, Aaron Stein Wolf, Lucy Grever Conroy, Ofri Edward Ohms, Mike Concho, and Jurek, Dennis McCartney, Lance Vera, Mark Lloyd Baker, Mike Terminite, Roy Hartley, Tina Krautz, Cherry Tyler, Mitchell Heldet, Sally, Tiffany Lee, Gumdrops, Nancy Kurtz, Ashwin Ruvakumar, Walud Damuni, Dick Newell, Anthony DeAngelo, Rena Q, Jeffred Edward, Akbash Shakita, Maya Jones, Julie, Melissa Sharowski, Kate, Jeff Green, Susan Singer, Deanne, Kai Arnold, Brian Thomas, Dimitri Ann, Carl Asper, Jack Papuro, Tony Watches Closely, Burns Lawler, Cro-Magnon Grimes, Jimmy Couture, John Sedurla, Christian McMasters, Freebird 1969, JH, Jack McCaffrey, Jose Manuel, and special shout out to Wesley Wiles. You guys are Patreon supporters. Please consider. We cannot thank you guys enough. If you're watching our show, you're just a regular YouTube subscriber, thank you so much. If you want to help us out, please consider being a Patreon supporter. The link is in the description box below. We're going to take a short break. Please don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Hey everyone, this is Kit Cabello with Harlens Media. I'm proud to actually do a follow-up interview with a former aldermanic candidate who was running in the 26th ward. Her name is Teresa Sao. We actually interviewed her when we were doing a short stay at Zacuto Studios. And, you know, just to rewind back the clocks, the Chicago election cycle for 2019 was a very historic race. We saw a lot of incumbent aldermen being challenged. It was the first time ever where the city of Chicago actually helped elect in a new council. And we have somebody here who's in our studio, Teresa. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that you've definitely learned a lot since the last election cycle in 2019. So I think it's very fair that for our viewers and subscribers, you reintroduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm Teresa Sao. I do a lot of philanthropic work in the Humboldt Park community, which it lies in the 26th ward. But my heart really goes out to a lot of people that are underserved. So my son's father, he had a medical clinic in the community for over 20 years. And after he passed away in 2014, I wanted to keep seeing that legacy go on. So maybe one day that my son will hopefully become a doctor. We all can
Okay.
hope. And I kept doing the same things that he was doing, giving back turkeys, I was listening to the patients, I was listening to community's concerns. And one of their biggest concerns is like nobody wants to listen to them. People, that's what my heart was, why I was running for the alderman candidate, is because a lot of people's voices were unheard, even if you do have money. And even if you don't have money. So I was just like, where is these people's complaints going to? And I felt that I wanted to listen to the people and try to get those their voices out there, and so we could make some changes in the community.
Right, and I just want to remind our viewers too, because when we talk about Chicago politics, I think it's very important for us to remember that this city has a long set history of corruption. So when we actually had a whole brand new batch of challengers to the incumbents, this was the first time ever any of them were really being effectively challenged. And look, you could be a grassroots candidate or somebody, with enough resources to really challenge the incumbents, but this is the Chicago machine we're talking about. And just a quick reminder, I keep on saying this, Chicago's not broke. Check out Tom Tresser's book about it, because we do have money. We have the TIF funds. So I want to ask you then this, Teresa, in regards towards your campaign, this was your first time, going up against an incumbent, somebody who's been in Chicago politics for quite some time. What were some of the things that you saw firsthand? What were some of the lessons you learned throughout this, running in Chicago politics, running for the 26th ward?
So be careful who you hire. That's what because some people will sell your information out quickly, which my information was sold out to to the incumbent.
Right.
A lot of it was very depressing because you'll think that people who you're close with and you keep your circle small, that somebody wouldn't do that. But if somebody fronts $10,000, $15,000 or a lawsuit against them, they will sell you out very quickly. And to the point that my mailers the alderman knew everything about my next move. So it was you could tell who kind of sold you out at the end of the day, because everybody said when the whole election's over, you're going to see everything. And basically I was able to see every single thing. Right. And I'm the type of person that I don't flip out easily, but it takes me a while. Right. And then I will react later on.
I think, and, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think it's very important to know that, especially running for public office, Correct. Your information's out there. Being involved in media, you're putting yourself out there or running, doing anything that's going to get a lot of attention. And one of the fear that a lot of people deal with is being doxxed or having your personal information being sent out there. And I think, especially going up against the Chicago machine, which is what we call the political machine here in the city of Chicago. It's a very challenging ordeal. But I have to say, though, in regards to some of the things that you have learned, what it helped inspire you to during this race, because I think it's important to note that there's obviously the bad, which we could talk about that for hours on end. But then there's also the good too.
Just seeing people's faces, just talking to them, listening to their concerns. I did a lot of events. A lot of people didn't even have the chance to we did a boat party, which, I'm young, so of course I want to do the new and latest things. And a lot of people never stepped outside of Humboldt Park. And that was my biggest concern, because we have this beautiful city and sometimes nobody wants to explore it at all. So I said, we're going to do our boat party, and it's going to be affordable for it was $20, even though it cost way more than that. It was $20 to come on the boat, and people were so amazed. They were taking pictures of the river. They never experienced that. So I just wanted to show other people, how do you get young people to vote? Show them something different. Show them that you can make a change and make a difference within your community.
Or that you care.
And that you care, correct. Because you can't keep doing the same old, same old. And that's when a lot of young voters are discouraged, because my parents always told me, why don't ever vote? And my parents were born, my dad was born in 45. So if somebody who's from 1945 is telling you not to vote, and I was born in 1986, it's kind of going to tell my other kids not to vote. And then you're going to keep passing on this generation until one person breaks the cycle and say that, voting is good. Maybe if our voice is going to be heard, we have to come out in numbers. Right. And I actually love that a lot of people actually try to come out and vote on that day. Even though they said it was the lowest turnout in history.
Yes, nothing I'm too proud to. I did not like reporting on that it was a low turnout.
Correct.
Myself and Daniel were upset about it, because this was a historic election where you could kick out the machine.
I think the mayor's race was people didn't understand. People didn't know what was going on, and so they were going to wait until the next, the runoffs.
Yeah, the runoff.
So a lot of people didn't want to vote until they saw who's the two that's going to be on there.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people were waiting for. And that kind of hurt it as well.
And you had 20 candidates running for
Correct.
the office
But
of mayor.
and then there's a lot of machines. And
Yeah.
if I could change something about the Board of Elections, is if there is fraud, the Board of Elections should be able to investigate it. And secondly, I think everybody wants to be like, yes, if there's fraud, because they know that the fraud exists because, there's a board person that comes there and they could see that they're fraud, but all they can do is document it. They can't do anything else.
Right.
Otherwise, you have to spend your money, which it costs a couple $100,000 to just get it in the court. And then you only have a small time frame. Mm-hmm. So now you see how the Chicago elections are.
Okay, see, I'm smiling in the background while she's telling this because I've heard this story so many times from challengers to incumbents or third-party candidates, whether they be green, independent, or libertarian, trying to get on the ballot. I mean, it's a monumental task, especially for Cook County, city of Chicago. To do that, to challenge the machine, you need resources, a ridiculous amount of resources, a lot of signatures. And I think it's a challenge, but I think at the same time, too, it kind of goes to the point, you got to step up to fight against this machine, because
Correct.
if you don't, it's just going to continue chugging along. And thankfully, we do have some brand new aldermen who took out some incumbents.
Yes.
And there's, of course, in the 14th Ward, the gentleman who shall not be named, Burke, Ed Burke.
Oh, he's still there.
Yes, he's still there, even though he's being investigated by the FBI. He's still in power for 50
I
years.
think his wife is the judge of something like this.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah, I know.
political dynasties here. But there's another issue, too, I want to bring up, because you talk about, helping out people. And, one of the, I love coming to the studio. I love driving from the south side up here to the north side. But, in a city that's hyper-segregated, in a city that's starting to
Yes.
become unaffordable,
Yes.
we are seeing more and more people being homeless, and it has to deal with unaffordable housing.
Correct.
Rent prices are skyrocketing.
Yes.
And not to mention, too, the majority reason why a lot of people are homeless or living in tents underneath the viaducts or in abandoned areas is because of ridiculously
Becoming the next LA.
medical bills or numerous other issues that are impacting them. So in regards to this, you've obviously on Thanksgiving helped pass out 300 turkeys to struggling families, which is fantastic. But what are some of the things that you've seen firsthand in regards to the homelessness situation where people are struggling here in the city of Chicago? I mean, what can really be done to help alleviate? I know there's a lot of talk about the TIF funds, but that's behind a lot of red tape. But there has to be some way to really help alleviate this crisis, because Chicago is filled with good people. I stand by that statement.
Correct.
This is a good city with good people, but with the most corrupt government in American history.
So I'm on the board of Roseland Hospital. I was able, everybody said after the aldermanic race, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be on the board of an underserved community hospital. And I said, Roseland Hospital, and everybody stopped and looked at me and they were like, are you freaking serious?
Could you elaborate a little bit on Roseland
So
Hospital?
Roseland Hospital is on 111th by
Right.
Michigan.
Right.
And it is in a very underserved community. I mean, have you ever been to the place New Orleans where Hurricane Katrina happened?
I'm aware of
looks
it.
just exactly the same, but we did not have a hurricane.
All right. I also want to help just clarify something, too. In the city of Chicago, there are areas that are severely impoverished. There are areas that do not have access to resources. There are areas that are being gentrified. There are areas that are being demolished. And the majority, it's on the south and west side areas of the city of Chicago. This is predominantly to working class families. And, when we say Chicago is hyper-segregated, there are certain areas of Chicago that are very affluent, that are that have access to more resources than they could shake a fist at. Whereas if you look at other parts of the city of Chicago, it's dilapidated. They're run
correct.
down, and it's not even. People would just wonder what exactly happened in this part of the city. So would you please
And
continue
a lot of
on?
people think that's maybe because people are lazy. They try to put a stigmatism to a certain race group. But you have to understand, I grew up on 95th and Commercial. Yeah, if you look at the south side of Chicago, that's very industrial. So a lot of people do not understand that they were steel mills over there. They were, it's a Pullman, right by Roseland, it's the Pullman district over there. So when those industrial places shut down, a lot of people lost their jobs, and there's no access to adequate trains. So if you're working downtown, how can you get to downtown from 111th and Michigan Avenue? It's impossible.
Right.
There's not taxi cabs that run over there, and we just recently got Uber within the last 10 years.
Right.
So even Uber is expensive for people to come from 111th all the way to the city of Chicago.
Wow.
So how are you trying to be able to get people jobs? There's not even local businesses over there. So the Walgreens shut down. That was so close over there. I mean, even a hospital almost shut down and had to be saved by the state. So because people are not utilizing it. And now that, you heard about Metro South Hospital, it's shut down completely.
Wow, and where are people going to go to actually get health care? I mean, granted,
So-
even healthcare here in the United States is ridiculously unaffordable.
It's unaffordable because I was
unaffordable.
paying $500 a month for my son, and I was paying $500 for myself to just buy insurance, and it only covered 80%, but I have a $5,000 deductible. So that's $1,000 every month. And I was thinking, maybe I should not pay the insurance and just get the penalty. But I'm like, but anything can happen to a 7-year-old kid.
Right.
So, but if somebody had to pay that insurance out of their pocket, and I'm well off to do, but if somebody didn't have an extra $1,000 a month, and then you have to put $5,000 if something happened, that's $6,000 going to your insurance, and then your insurance is only covering 80%.
Right.
So you could get another $10,000 bill. You could pay $16,000 in 1 year. And people do not think about that. People keep saying that, the affordable health care. I don't have a problem with Medicare and Medicaid, but I just want people to be able to get access to insurance. And some people refuse to go to hospitals because they can't, like the diabetic, people are diabetic. Their insulin only covers X amount of days.
Right.
But my dad was type 1 diabetes, and some people, you heard of young kids until ages 24, 25 dying because they didn't have enough money to pay for their diabetic medication.
Right.
And some people are making the comparison, but we give free Narcan to people, but we don't give free diabetic medications to other people.
Right.
You can't control the pharmaceutical companies.
But there is something to bring up, though. If we just look at our neighbors up north, when Senator Bernie Sanders took a whole bunch of people who need diabetic medicine or any kind of medicine at all, they were able to get 6 months supplies for that one-day trip they went up to Canada.
Right.
Whereas in the United States, they have to ration. I don't know whatever they would get. So
I read a story where a kid who had a ration because he said, until my next paycheck, I'll be able to get my diabetic medication. So he died 2 days before his next paycheck to get the insulin.
Right.
And I said, we're living in the United States. Right. We're not in a third world country. But we're acting like a third world country.
Well, we've covered here a lot in Heartlands Media about money and politics, the influence of lobby groups and how they're buying our politicians, and in turn favoring the pharmaceutical, the healthcare industry, big oil, all of it. And it's helping also out the military-industrial complex because money is speech and corporations are people, thanks to Citizens United and McCutcheon's decision. But that's a whole other conversation for another day, but it's one of the leading causes. So in regards to your work at the Roseland Hospital, what is right now the outreach towards the community? I mean, I know there's a lot of work that needs to be done and much needed help probably at the federal, state, and city and county level.
I know Tim Egan, the CEO of the hospital, fights all the time in Springfield to get more funding to the hospital. I remember he told me in a meeting, he says, we need funding for a hospital, and we can't get it because places like University of Chicago, they get the same amount of money we do, but they will need $36 million. How do they need $36 million when we actually need the 30-something million dollars? Right. We don't even have adequate furniture, healthcare furniture. We don't have new updated machines. So you're pushing all those. Basically, you're making a big push to the big corporations, which is like Northwestern, University of Chicago, those type of places.
Right.
Where Northwestern, you got to understand, they like the bottom line. They got rid of 200,000 patients at Blue Cross Blue Shield. They refused to accept Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Wow.
So you have to understand like how some hospitals work. And I remember I was talking to some hospital executives. They said hospitals is a business, so you got to take your heart away from it because you're gonna cry every day. And I'm like, it is a business. But what I like about Roseland and what I like about even Tim Egan, the CEO, is that you have your heart in the right place. This is not a business. It's more than it's actually you're taking care of somebody's life. Right. And you want the people to come back. And I wish that we could have so many people to come and visit the hospital and stay in the hospital, but a lot of people just have heavy Medicaid insurance. Right.
So I think because looking at this presidential race, you have obviously Senator Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan. I think it's much needed. We've talked about it. We've done numerous stories where, recently it just came out where an article by GoFundMe was written on Common Dreams where, they give tips for people on how to set up a GoFundMe account just to pay off, for medical bills for cancer. And it's ridiculous that it's happening here. So in regards to this, there obviously is a lot of talk about Medicare for all, single-payer health care. And, we also hear stories about how this impacts doctors and nurses where they have the knowledge and the technology and the know-how to help somebody, but yet there's a lot of people who are making a very conscious and rational, but very rational decision to get out because these medical bills just pile up, and then people have to choose, okay, do I risk bankruptcy or do I try and do this and still have a job, still take care of my family? So in regards to single-payer health care and Medicare for all, has there been a lot of talk or conversation about really, talking about it so we can have affordable health care? Because the rest of the world has seemed to have figured it out. They have something. Australia has it.
Correct.
Canada has it. Great Britain has it. Germany. Dare I even say it, Russia and China seem to have their act together, where the United States is stuck in the stagnation.
If the government is going to be controlled by all these companies, which I'm saying pharmaceutical companies, like for instance, like might make people laugh, but like Viagra, it's probably the most money-making pill Pfizer has, and they had the patent for X amount of years, so they made their money back within the first year. Even though it cost them by billions of dollars, but they made their money back in the first year. So why would those companies could buy the politicians and run the races, because it cost me $400,000 to run my aldermanic race.
Wow.
If Pfizer could drop, let's say $100 million in the presidential race, and you don't know where these people are getting the money, because they could, how they have their little different ways of donations.
Yes, well, I mean, right now there's a lot of talk of, especially with two presidential candidates in particular, Bloomberg and Tom Steyer, both billionaires, and both somehow are doing very well in this race. And then you also have Biden with super PACs too, keeping him afloat and relevant in this race. But yet they're all rallying against Medicare for all, and I can't help but think of, there has to be a level of compassion, and there has to be a real talk and fight for single payer health care. So I mean,
my point I would love to get rid of is the ACO. The reason why a lot of people they don't like it, because the ACO gets millions of dollars. And so, for instance, like somebody was complaining about on Facebook, oh, my Medicare doesn't cover this medication anymore. Well, you're in an ACO, which is a Medicare managed plan. The ACOs are supposed to manage the patients. Ask any of your friends if the ACOs ever manage the patients. No.
Well, there's a whole bunch of reforms that need to be done.
Correct.
Especially
it was a great idea, but it's just people found loopholes. That's what in the system.
I think when we look at it, especially when we talk about Medicare for all and affordable health care, a lot of Americans, especially those even on the right, are asking for some kind of much needed reform. And with Bernie Sanders and his message, I mean,
just go on one single payer system.
Yeah, a single payer system, which, dare I say it, if it's working in other countries, we can figure out a way to make it work.
You don't need an insurance company to have an actual profit of $200-something billion. I'm like, and you couldn't even pay my bill in the hospital. Exactly. Like, I have United Healthcare.
Exactly.
And I'm over here complaining about the $200 bill that I had to come after the hospital. I'm like, how is this possible? Are you actually making a profit? That's not, after. I'm like, wait, how is that possible?
That's why you have
and
to.
And people, nobody argue. Nobody says anything about it, but everybody's so upset about other companies. But, like, Amazon, Google. But I'm like, your health, if something happens tomorrow, what's going to happen to us? Your insurance is supposed to be paid, we need a single payer system, I believe. And I thought about it one time. I thought about it one time and I said, like, why, Medicare for everybody is not going to work out. But I'm like, when I'm looking at these companies right now, how the loopholes, Blue Cross Blue Shield is part of the ACOs, Meridian, Illini Care, those are all, you have huge insurance companies that are supposed to be managing the care of a patient. When has your ACO ever called you and say, hey, you need to go to a referral? That's what they're supposed to be doing. You need to do this, X, Y, and Z. How we're going to help you prevent this type of preventative care. That's what they're supposed to be doing. But do they do it? No. Right. So they made all that extra money, and then they took away from the Medicare insurance, and now people are complaining, like, what's going on with my Medicare is not paying for this. My Medicare is not paying for that.
Yeah. And it has to deal with the insurance companies and their influence. But now I just want to, just as we get close to the end of this interview, I know you've been doing a lot of entrepreneurial work. You've been working in collaboration with Exclusive PR, which is a local group here in the city of Chicago. Yes. I've actually had a chance to speak to some of their members in the past. They've been doing some great work with a lot of individuals like yourself. So I know you're doing a lot of work. So for our viewers, subscribers that want to learn more about you, maybe help you out with some of your philanthropic work, Where can I learn more about you online on social media?
We have a medical student training company called Omni Medical Student Training. It trains medical students from the Caribbean and who wants to get a residency here in the U.S. So they do their clinical clerkships here in the U.S. So they can find all this information on that site or on my personal website. It's teresasiao.com.
right.
I'm always on Facebook. I talk a lot. I don't care if you have an opinion. You might battle it out a little bit, but I like to listen to people. Somebody always said that in order for you to be good at what you do, you always got to listen to the negatives as well. And so you could always change and tweak what you need to do so you could become successful.
All right. Thank you, Teresa,
Thanks,
so much
Kit.
for being here on Heartlands Media. This is Kit Cabela's Heartlands Media. Peace, everyone, and let us all do what we can to build a better future.